This is a video I made for my YouTube channel of my ride across Australia on my BMW 1250 GSA motorcycle. We had initially intended to ride across to ULAROO, then back across on the Great Central Road to back home. Headed towards HYDEN so we could head off on the HYDEN Norseman road to the campsite at the breakaways. I had the motorbike set up so that I was fairly independent because I was travelling by myself. So I had to make sure that all the things I needed were on the bike. I carried a fuel bladder with 6 litres of fuel in it, plus 30 litres in my fuel tank. I had about 8 litres of water, a little gas stove, and all the other things that I needed for camping. I also carried tyre repair kit, tools, clothes, spare shoes, all that sort of thing. Probably about 50 kilos of luggage all up. The road was in reasonable condition, and this bike sort of handles gravel quite nicely. It can slide around a bit, but if you sort of sit on about 70 to 90, it's quite a pleasant sort of drive, and it makes a reasonable time. And this actual road cuts about 120 kilometres off the full distance to Norseman. It was interesting watching the bush change as I progressed along the track. The bush changed from fairly sort of substantial growth to small scrub-like sort of, hard to describe it, just lacking in structure sort of bush as I progressed east, probably to do with the rainfall. I think I passed probably about 3 or 4 vehicles on this 300 kilometre gravel road over the whole trip. Fairly quiet. The east I went, the bush started to become more and more sparse, obviously with less rain falling in this area as I approached Norseman. The road surface consisted of very well graded surface to loose gravel and then slippery clay. Generally it was reasonably comfortable riding the actual gravel road, but you did have to concentrate and pick your lines to avoid the actual inevitable crash if you didn't concentrate. This road leads onto the Norseman Kalgoorlie road, so we head down towards Norseman and get onto the air highway. So we actually filled the bike up with petrol at Norseman and proceeded to ride to Balladonia, where I decided to hire a donger for the night, so I could have a shower and probably a decent feed. Camping at Border Village, there was a very noisy crow that decided to sit up in my tent, and I was making this crow noise for quite some time, and it was quite amusing watching its antics. I sort of was intending to fly the drone down the Nullarbor cliffs, but it was very strong wind, so I could only just fly around while I could still see the drone. I didn't want to risk sort of put it in over the cliff because it was so windy. It was a bit disappointing not being able to sort of fly over the cliff because I think that's where all the best views are, but it was very, very windy, and if I did, I wouldn't be assured of being able to salvage it if it sort of did a flyaway. So put that off until maybe when we get back. I thought the Nullarbor roadhouse, this wild dingo came in from the bush and started wandering around the petrol station. Don't know what it was doing, but it was certainly wandering around. Driving up the Stuart Hwy, the next stop was going to be the Spuds Roadhouse, which I'd read about somewhere as an iconic roadhouse. Spuds Roadhouse was about 300 k's up the road from Port Augusta, and it was based in a small community called Pemba. Traffic uses this road, including big, large triple road trains and lots of cars and trucks and you name it. And what I did notice was the huge numbers of carcasses of roadkill all lined alongside the road. This is probably mainly the big trucks sort of bearing down on these animals during the night, where they tend to hang on the road. Settlement of Pemba is where the Stuart Highway diverts with another road that goes to Woomera, which is about 25 kilometres from Pimba itself. Tuesday the 7th, I had a day off from riding my bike and had a bit of a wander around Cooper. It was quite an interesting sort of walk. We put the drone up and got some footage, and then we went to the museum, which is an old opal mine which they've converted to a museum for visitors to walk around through the actual old mine. And they had a shop where if you had enough money you could buy the opals, but they were somewhat expensive, the ones they had on display. A couple they wouldn't even let me sort of buy them. Anyway, here we are, just enjoy the footage. The 7th of October, Cooper PD. museum was actually quite good value. It had all the displays very well set out, and it was all within an old working opal mine that they've converted to the museum itself. It was really quite a well presentation. Didn't mind paying the $30. I took a bit of a video of the cracks on my front tyre just to show you people the situation. It's not sure if it was unsafe or not, but I preferred to sort of play safe, so that's why I decided to change the tyre. Yeah, I must admit I wouldn't feel confident passing road trains at the speed that I have to pass them with this front tyre. It may sort of explode. So I made a decision to try and get a new front tyre, and ringing around and what have you, the nearest place that could supply the new front tyre was in Adelaide. So I had to go all the way back to Adelaide to get the new front tyre. This is day 8 of the motorbike trip across Oz. We left Kalgoorlie around about 9:30 and headed off back down the Stuart Hwy because I'm not confident about my front tyre, which has splits going all around the outer circle, and I don't think it will last the trip across the Nullarbor. So anyway, we headed off back down the road and ended up at Port Augusta for the night. And on the way we took some footage of some of the scenery on the way and so forth. So enjoy. Also note the heavy rain clouds. And the rain itself was pretty heavy at some of these stages. It just came in sort of sections, you know. It'd be dry, then suddenly it'd be pouring very heavy rain. Even though the rain was quite heavy, in between the rain cloud outbursts, the temperature was still fairly warm, but it dried you out, so it was continually becoming wet and then dry, wet and dry most of the way down the Stuart Highway until I got to Port Augusta. I eventually arrived in Adelaide after traversing the rush hour traffic, and we booked into the hotel, and in the meantime I went and got my new tyre replaced, which was close by, which was good, and relaxed in the hotel. Navigating down the north-south road was particularly bad because they were constructing this $16 billion tunnel to replace the north-south road, and it had the traffic going in and out of diversions all the time, which is a real pain. I ended up getting a Dunlop Mission Raid tyre, which is still a knobbly, but it wasn't quite as noisy as the other one I had, and it's supposed to be better on the road. The hotel was really quite comfortable after all that stress that I went through. While staying at the hotel, I had a few odd jobs to do. My boots had, the plastic part had cracked, so I had to sort of rejoin it. So using my dental floss, I've got some very strong dental floss, I sewed them up. The Flinders Adelaide University was just across the road from the hotel, and there were lots of big corporation type sort of businesses had their buildings in this area, which was all quite new. Had Stuart Hwy for dinner that night. I left Adelaide at about 9:30 in the morning, went through all the rush hour horrific traffic, trying to find my way back to the road going to Port Augusta. Anyway, we eventually got the road and passed a few interesting things on the way down, like this big pink lake. It was quite huge. There was a couple of them actually. The phone GPS was put to good use getting down to the Port Augusta road. It had been winding all over the place, trying to head on the right direction. Anyway, eventually got to Port Augusta. After a 6-hour ride, I arrived at Port Augusta and booked into the same hotel that I stayed in on the way to Adelaide. Motel manager made me this pizza for dinner, which was quite a nice pizza. Put the drone up to get some shots of the town side and the surrounding hills and various salt pans and not too many other features sort of stood out. There's a causeway crossing some of the salt pans as we get closer to the town site. But apart from that, it's just another big South Australian town. Tomorrow we'll be heading off early in the morning, heading towards Ceduna, and I hope to probably stay the night there too. So we'll see how we go. Back in the early 90s, when I was in the Army Reserve, we spent about 2 weeks here at an exercise called El Alamein on the Spencer Gulf, and it was brought back memories. I hope you're enjoying the videos I'm making. Riding a long way to make all these videos. Many hours on the bike. Anyway, it's an adventure. Arrived in Ceduna after about a 7-hour ride and booked into the cabin and treated myself to some decent food. Very nice. The weather forecast was very light winds and a really nice day, so I decided to head towards the Nullarbor. I was going to go to Fowler Bay. Decided to head towards the Nullarbor and Border Village instead. On the way up, the wind was very strong and I couldn't really get over the cliff. cliff with a drone, so weather was supposed to be very mild, so this is when I managed to get some decent shots of the actual cliffs. Getting some good shots, I headed back on the air highway and headed down to Border Village, where I stayed the night. Next stop, Border Village, which is where we spent the night. Next stop, Laverton. When we arrived, this guy was filling up his aeroplane, which is quite interesting. He landed it on the airstrip next to the resort and taxied around to the petrol pump. Yeah, we left Laverton fairly early in the morning and headed off to Norseman and then headed to the Great Eastern Highway back to Perth 9.5 hours later. Unfortunately, I didn't go on the Norseman HYDEN road. I went through the Kalgoorlie road, and it was a terrible road. Lots of traffic, road trains, caravans, and didn't enjoy that section at all. Overall, I enjoyed the trip, and it was certainly an adventure. I'd recommend it to people.